Sir, could you be my husband for one day? The black maid's request that melted the Mafia boss. Jasmine Carter stood in the doorway of the Mafia boss's office, her hands trembling slightly as she summoned the courage to speak. She had practiced this moment over and over in her head, but now that she was here, the words felt heavier than she had imagined. Her voice, quiet but determined, finally broke the silence. Sir, could you be my husband for one day? Dominic Romano, the Mafia boss, didn't immediately react. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his dark eyes studying her as if trying to read her thoughts. He was used to people asking for favors, but nothing like this. His gaze was sharp, his posture relaxed, yet there was an underlying tension in the air, like a storm about to break. Jasmine swallowed, her pulse racing. She had no idea how he would respond, but she couldn't back out now. She had no other choice. It's for my family, she continued, her voice faltering just a bit. I told them I was married, and now they expect to meet him. Please, just for one day. She could feel the weight of the room, the silence pressing down on her like a physical force. Dominic didn't speak right away. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest as she waited, every second stretching into eternity. Finally, Dominic leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together, his gaze never leaving hers. Why would you ask me? His voice was smooth, controlled, with an edge that made Jasmine's skin prickle. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I have no one else to ask, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm just trying to keep the peace at home. I don't want to disappoint them. It's just a small favor. Dominic's eyes narrowed slightly, as if assessing her. She could tell he was weighing her words, trying to decide whether to dismiss her or give in to her request. What's in it for me? He asked, his voice still calm, but now with a hint of curiosity. Jasmine hesitated, then said, I will do anything you ask in return. Anything. There was a long pause. Dominic studied her, his gaze intense. Jasmine could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, but she held his gaze, refusing to look away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. I'll help you, he said, his voice low and steady. But only because I find your honesty interesting. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat, relief washing over her. She hadn't expected him to agree so easily, and for a moment, she couldn't quite believe it. But this was Dominic Romano, a man who held the power to shape lives with a single word. And yet, for some reason, he was helping her. It wasn't just a favor anymore. It was the beginning of something Jasmine couldn't yet comprehend. As she left his office, the weight of the decision hung in the air, and a part of her couldn't help but wonder where this unexpected favor would lead. Jasmine took a deep breath as she stood outside the grand mansion, her palms sweating despite the cool evening air. She had never imagined herself in this position, standing on the threshold of a world so far removed from her own. Her heart raced as she glanced at the black Mercedes parked in front, the same one that Dominic Romano had arrived in earlier that day. She wasn't nervous about the party. No, it wasn't the social expectations that had her shaking. It was the man who had agreed to her outrageous request. Dominic Romano, the powerful Mafia boss, had taken her at her word, agreeing to pretend to be her husband for a single day. But as she looked up at the mansion's towering gates, a thought hit her. What did it mean for him to help her? Jasmine had never known men like him. Cold, calculating, and yet, for some reason, Dominic had seen something in her. Was it pity? Or was it just a moment of capricious kindness? She couldn't tell. She didn't know how to read men like Dominic, and, truthfully, she didn't think she wanted to. The fact that he had agreed to her request without hesitation had been a shock in itself. She hadn't expected him to take her seriously, much less promise to help her in front of his staff. It wasn't until she had left his office that the weight of what she had asked hit her fully. But now, there was no turning back. Jasmine adjusted the sleeves of her simple dress, trying to calm her nerves as she made her way toward the mansion. The grandiose structure loomed over her, and despite herself, she felt small, insignificant, like an outsider in a world that didn't belong to her. She had spent her life in the shadows, always the invisible one, the one who cleaned up after the wealthy and powerful. But tonight, she had a chance to step into the light, even if it was just for a moment. As she approached the front doors, the butler opened them with a respectful nod, his eyes briefly studying her attire before stepping aside to let her in. The mansion's interior was even more lavish than she had imagined, with high ceilings, ornate chandeliers, and intricate artwork lining the walls. She could hear laughter and clinking glasses in the distance as she followed the butler toward the dining room, where the party was being held. Her nerves were on edge as she caught sight of the guests, high-powered businessmen, socialites, and women dressed in expensive gowns that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Jasmine had never felt more out of place. Her dress was simple, modest, a far cry from the expensive, tailored gowns the other women were wearing. But she didn't have time to dwell on it. Her eyes found Dominic almost immediately, standing by the grand fireplace, his presence commanding the room as always. He was dressed in a dark suit, the fit so perfect it could have been custom-made. His gaze flicked toward her as she entered, and for a moment, their eyes locked. He nodded once, his expression unreadable, and Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. Was he really going to pretend to be her husband in front of all these people? She wasn't sure what to expect, but his calm demeanor gave her a sense of reassurance. The guests, most of whom had been talking in animated groups, fell into a stunned silence as they took in the sight of Dominic and Jasmine standing together. Jasmine felt the weight of their gaze but kept her posture straight, focusing on her breathing to keep herself from feeling overwhelmed. Dominic, however, showed no signs of discomfort. He stepped forward, his arm lightly brushing against hers as he placed it around her shoulders in a protective, yet casual manner. The simple touch made Jasmine's breath catch in her throat. "Everyone, this is my wife, Jasmine." Dominic's voice rang out smoothly, loud enough for the room to hear. The announcement, though casual, was met with hushed murmurs from the guests. Some looked curious, others skeptical, and a few exchanged knowing glances. Jasmine felt her heart race again, but this time, it was not from fear. There was something almost comforting in the way Dominic had introduced her, like a shield, a barrier between her and the scrutiny of the crowd. As the evening progressed, Dominic stayed close, his attention never fully leaving her side. Every time someone tried to engage with him, he would turn the conversation back to her with such ease that it almost felt natural. He asked her about her life, her background, as though they had known each other for years, not mere hours. At first, Jasmine was unsure how to respond, but as the evening wore on, she began to relax, the tension in her shoulders easing. It felt strange, this sudden connection with him. She had always viewed men like Dominic as untouchable, unreachable. But here he was, standing by her side, offering protection and comfort in a world that had never been kind to her. As the night went on, Jasmine couldn't help but notice the way the other guests looked at them, some with admiration, others with envy. She didn't know if it was because of the power Dominic held or the way he treated her, but it was impossible to ignore the shift in the atmosphere whenever they were together. By the time the party began to wind down, Jasmine was no longer the invisible woman she had once been. She had stepped into a role she had never imagined for herself, and Dominic had made it feel real, even if only for one night. As they left the party, Dominic placed a hand gently on her back, guiding her out of the mansion. His touch was warm, reassuring, and Jasmine realized something then. She had never felt so seen, so valued, in her entire life. And for the first time, she wondered if this was what it felt like to be truly cared for. The days following the party had been a blur for Jasmine. She hadn't expected the aftermath to feel so strange. Her life had shifted in subtle ways, ways she hadn't anticipated. Dominic's presence lingered in the back of her mind, even when he wasn't around. The way he had stood by her side, so effortlessly, like he belonged there. It wasn't just a mask for the night. It was real. Or, at least, it felt real. Jasmine had spent years feeling invisible, dismissed by the world around her. But with Dominic, it was as though she had been seen for the first time. She found herself thinking about their brief moments together, those fleeting exchanges where his eyes had softened when he looked at her. She didn't know what it meant, but it had made her heart flutter in a way that was both unsettling and thrilling. It was the day after the party when she received a call that would change everything. The phone rang in the quiet of her apartment, the sound cutting through the stillness like a sharp knife. She picked up, unsure of what to expect. Jasmine, Dominic's voice was steady, calm, but there was something in it that made her stomach flip. "I need you to meet me. We have something to discuss." It wasn't a question, and Jasmine knew better than to ask what it was about. She had learned quickly that Dominic didn't make requests. He made demands. The car arrived an hour later, sleek and black, as always. Jasmine stepped inside, the cool leather seats welcoming her as the vehicle sped toward the mansion. Her thoughts raced, trying to prepare for whatever was to come. She wasn't sure what had prompted this meeting, but she couldn't deny the strange feeling gnawing at her. Something had shifted between them after that night. She had felt it in the way he had touched her arm, in the way he had defended her without hesitation. As the car slowed to a stop in front of the mansion, Jasmine's heart rate quickened. She hadn't been here in days, and yet it felt as though she had never left. The imposing structure loomed before her, and for the first time, she wondered if she was truly ready for whatever was about to unfold. As she stepped out of the car, the front door opened, and she was greeted by Dominic's assistant, who led her inside. The mansion felt colder now, more intimidating, and Jasmine couldn't help but feel a sense of unease settle over her. Dominic was waiting in the grand study, his back to the door as he stood by the window, looking out over the sprawling grounds. He didn't turn as she entered, but his presence filled the room, commanding her attention in a way she couldn't escape. "Come in, Jasmine." His voice broke the silence, and she obeyed without hesitation. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable as he studied her for a long moment. The weight of his gaze was almost too much to bear, and for a second, Jasmine felt herself shrink under the intensity. But she held her ground, refusing to let him see her uncertainty. "You've been thinking about what happened, haven't you?" he asked, his tone soft but deliberate. Jasmine nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She had been thinking about nothing else since the party, trying to make sense of what it all meant. Why had he helped her? Why had he been so kind, when it was clear he didn't have to be? Dominic took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've been thinking too," he said, his voice lowering, "about how much you've changed things for me." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. What did he mean by that? Before she could respond, Dominic closed the distance between them, his presence overwhelming in the quiet room. He reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, a touch that sent a shiver down her spine. "I'm not a man who does things without reason," he continued, his eyes searching hers. "But what happened between us that night, it wasn't just a favor. It wasn't just about a lie for your family. It was about something else." Jasmine's mind raced, her heart thumping in her chest. She had no idea where this conversation was headed, but she couldn't deny the magnetic pull she felt toward him. For a moment, everything else faded away. The world outside the study seemed to disappear, leaving just the two of them in the room. Dominic's hand remained on her shoulder, steady and reassuring, as he looked at her with an intensity that left her breathless. "I'm offering you something," he said, his voice soft yet firm. "Not just for today, but for the future." Jasmine's pulse quickened, her mind reeling as she tried to process his words. What was he offering? "I want you to stay with me," he said, the words coming slowly, as though weighing them carefully. "Not as a maid, not as someone who works for me, but as someone who means more to me." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to this unexpected turn of events. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? "You don't have to say anything now," Dominic continued, his hand still on her shoulder. "But I want you to know that the offer is there. Think about it, Jasmine. Think about what you want." Jasmine stood in silence, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had never imagined that a simple favor, a desperate request, would lead her to this moment. But here she was, caught in a web of feelings she couldn't escape, unsure of where it would take her. She had always been invisible, unnoticed by the world around her. But with Dominic, everything had changed. And now, she had to decide what that meant for her future. The next few days were filled with a strange sense of anticipation for Jasmine. She had never felt so torn between two worlds. On one hand, there was the life she had always known, the life of a maid, a woman who stayed in the background, never asking for more. But on the other hand, there was Dominic's offer, a chance to step into something unfamiliar, something that could change everything. It was a struggle that left her restless, unable to sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of what could be. She spent her days going through the motions, doing her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to that conversation with Dominic. She couldn't forget the way he had looked at her, the weight of his words as they hung in the air. "Think about it, Jasmine." He had given her space, told her to take her time, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was something important, something that could alter the course of her life. It was late one evening when she finally made up her mind. She stood in front of her small apartment mirror, her reflection staring back at her with uncertainty. But there was a new determination in her eyes, a spark of something she hadn't felt before. She was ready to take the next step. She grabbed her coat and headed out, her heart pounding in her chest. As she arrived at the mansion, the familiar sight of the towering gates didn't feel as intimidating anymore. The guards nodded at her as she passed, and she felt a strange sense of familiarity, as though she had been here 1,000 times. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't just a maid. She was something more. Jasmine walked up to the front door, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for the handle. She knocked softly, her breath catching in her throat as she waited for someone to answer. The door swung open, and there stood Dominic, looking as calm and composed as ever. His dark eyes studied her for a moment before a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "You came," he said, his voice warm but guarded. Jasmine nodded, her heart racing. "I've thought about it," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I've made my decision." Dominic stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. "Come in," he said, his tone soft but authoritative. As she crossed the threshold, the familiar sense of being an outsider lingered, but it wasn't as strong as it had been before. This time, she was walking in with purpose. She wasn't just here to clean or to serve. She was here to decide her own fate. They walked together down the grand hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence. Jasmine couldn't help but notice the way Dominic's presence filled the space, his quiet confidence making her feel both nervous and oddly at ease. He stopped in front of the study door and turned to face her. "What is your decision?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Jasmine looked up at him, her mind clear for the first time in days. She had spent so much time overthinking, but now, standing here with him, everything felt right. "I'll stay," she said, her voice strong. "I'll stay and I'll be part of your world." Dominic's expression softened, the intensity in his eyes shifting to something gentler, something that made Jasmine's heart flutter. He reached out, his hand resting on her shoulder for a moment before he spoke again. "You know what this means, right?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I know," she replied. "I'm ready." He gave her a small nod and led her into the study, closing the door behind them. The room was quiet, the air thick with unspoken words. For a moment, neither of them spoke, as if both were waiting for something to shift, for the moment to settle. Finally, Dominic broke the silence. "You've made a choice, Jasmine," he said, his voice deep and filled with something unreadable. "But remember, this isn't just about what I want. It's about what you need, too." Jasmine looked up at him, her mind racing. What did she need? She hadn't thought about that before. She had always been focused on surviving, on getting through the day, but now, for the first time, she had the chance to think about what she truly wanted. The thought was overwhelming, but at the same time, it was liberating. Dominic studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense and unwavering. "You're not just here to play a role," he said softly. "You're here because you're someone I want to protect, someone who matters." The words hit her like a wave, and for the first time, she realized that Dominic's offer wasn't just about power or control. It was about connection. He wasn't just offering her a place in his world. He was offering her a chance to belong. As the night wore on, Jasmine stayed by his side, her heart a whirlwind of emotions. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. And that was enough to keep her moving forward. Jasmine had been living in the mansion for a few weeks now, and each day felt like a strange new chapter. The rooms, once intimidating and cold, had started to feel like home. Or at least, they felt like her space now. She had her own room, not just a small quarters behind the kitchen, but a real, comfortable room with soft bedding and windows that looked out over the gardens. She had never imagined such luxury, never thought she would be living in a place like this. And yet, here she was, adjusting to a life she hadn't asked for but had been thrust into. Her relationship with Dominic had changed in subtle ways. He no longer seemed like the distant, unreachable Mafia boss that had first intimidated her. His presence, while still commanding, had softened around her. There were moments, like during their quiet dinners together, when she felt a growing connection between them. They didn't speak much, but there was an understanding, a silent acknowledgement that something unspoken was happening. Jasmine often found herself thinking about the nights when Dominic would sit across from her, his gaze steady and thoughtful, as though he were trying to figure her out. He never pushed her to talk, but he listened when she did. They had begun sharing stories from their past, little by little. She told him about her childhood, the struggles she had faced growing up, and the pain of losing her mother. Dominic, in turn, shared fragments of his life, his father's death, the weight of leading the family business, and the loneliness that often came with being at the top. Despite their vastly different lives, Jasmine found herself connecting with him in ways she hadn't expected. He was not the cold, ruthless man she had assumed him to be. He had his own scars, his own battles. And for the first time in her life, Jasmine didn't feel so alone. But there were still moments of doubt, moments when she questioned her decision to stay. What was she really doing here? Was she truly part of his world now? Or was she just another pawn in a game she didn't fully understand? The question haunted her during the quiet hours of the night, when she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had made a mistake. Her thoughts were interrupted one evening when Dominic asked her to join him for a meeting. It wasn't anything unusual. He often had business dealings with associates, and sometimes Jasmine would accompany him for appearances. But this time felt different. As they entered the lavishly decorated meeting room, Jasmine could feel the tension in the air. Dominic, as always, was composed, but there was an edge to him that she hadn't seen before. He motioned for her to sit beside him, and she did, her eyes scanning the room, noting the presence of several powerful figures she had seen in passing but never interacted with. The conversation was centered around the family's operations, and Jasmine listened in silence as Dominic and the others discussed various matters. She was familiar with the language of business now, having overheard enough to understand the basics, but she still felt like an outsider in these conversations. As the meeting progressed, Dominic's attention occasionally flickered toward her, as if checking that she was all right. It was a small gesture, but it didn't go unnoticed. Jasmine caught his eye once, and for a brief moment, their gaze locked. It was as if the world had quieted for a second, leaving only the two of them in the room. She quickly looked away, feeling a rush of warmth spread across her cheeks. After the meeting, Dominic excused himself for a moment to speak with one of the men in private. Jasmine was left standing by the table, unsure of what to do next. The tension in the room lingered, and she found herself feeling more out of place than ever. Just as she was about to turn and leave, Dominic re-entered the room, his expression more serious than she had seen before. "Jasmine," he said, his voice low and firm. "There's something I need to talk to you about." Her heart skipped a beat. Was something wrong? She followed him back to his office, the air between them thick with unspoken words. When the door closed behind them, Dominic turned to face her, his gaze intense. "I need you to understand something," he said, his tone softer now. "You are more than just a maid in this house. You are part of this family now, and that means you are under my protection." Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat as his words sank in. She had known this in some ways, but hearing him say it out loud made it real. For the first time, she realized just how deeply his actions had impacted her life. She wasn't just living in the mansion as a servant. She was part of something bigger, something that went beyond what she had ever imagined for herself. "I know this life isn't easy," Dominic continued, his voice steady but filled with something that almost sounded like regret. "But I want you to know that you're not alone in this. If you ever feel uncertain, if you ever need anything, you come to me." His words were reassuring, but there was something else there too, a promise, unspoken but clear. Jasmine nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She had no idea what the future held, but in that moment, she realized something important. She had found a place where she truly mattered. It wasn't the mansion, or the luxury, or the power that mattered most. It was the connection, the trust. And for the first time in a long while, Jasmine allowed herself to believe that she might have found a future here. The days had begun to blend together for Jasmine, each one moving in a steady rhythm that seemed almost surreal. She had settled into her new role with Dominic, her life inside the mansion now a strange mix of routine and unexpected moments. There were mornings when she would wake to the soft hum of the mansion's groundskeeper, the scent of fresh coffee filling the air as she prepared for her duties. But there was always a lingering tension beneath the surface, a constant reminder that her life had shifted in ways she couldn't have imagined. She had found herself spending more time with Dominic, though their conversations remained mostly professional. He would often ask about her day, her thoughts, and sometimes he would simply sit in silence with her, as though waiting for her to speak. But as time passed, something was changing. The way he looked at her had softened, and though he never outright acknowledged it, Jasmine could feel a shift in their dynamic. It wasn't just about the favor he had done for her anymore. It was about something deeper. It was the way he made her feel safe, even in the most unsettling of circumstances. It was the way he respected her, as if she were more than just a maid to him. But despite everything, Jasmine still couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. The other staff members, though polite, kept their distance from her. They didn't treat her like they treated the others. She was still the new girl in their eyes, and no matter how much she tried to fit in, she couldn't escape the sense that she didn't belong. But there was one thing that made all of it worth it: the moments with Dominic. They were few and far between, but when they happened, they felt like a breath of fresh air in a life that had been suffocating. One such moment came during a quiet evening after dinner. Jasmine was cleaning up the table, her hands moving instinctively as she wiped down the surfaces. Dominic was sitting by the window, his posture relaxed, but there was an intensity in the air, like he was waiting for something. Jasmine finished cleaning the last of the dishes and turned toward him. His gaze met hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if they were both caught in the same thought, a shared understanding that needed no words. Finally, Dominic broke the silence. "You know, you don't have to keep doing all this," he said, his voice soft but firm. Jasmine looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. Dominic stood up slowly, his movements deliberate. He walked over to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I mean, you don't have to be here, working like this, all the time," he said, his voice low. "You've already done more than enough." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what to say, how to respond. She had never been in a position where someone offered her more than what she had asked for. She had always been the one to give, to sacrifice. But with Dominic, it felt different. He wasn't asking for anything. He was offering her something she had never dared to imagine. "I don't mind," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "I'm happy to help." Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. But then, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips, and for the first time, Jasmine saw something else in his eyes, something warm, something real. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder, the contact sending a shiver down her spine. "I know you are," he said, his voice softening. "But I want you to know that you don't have to do this for me. You're more than just someone who works here." Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. She had never heard him say anything like that before, and it left her feeling exposed in a way she wasn't used to. For a moment, she wasn't sure if she could trust herself to speak. But when she finally found her voice, all she could say was, "Thank you." Dominic's smile grew a little wider. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "But I think you should take a little more time for yourself. You've been carrying the weight of too many things for too long." Jasmine looked at him, searching his face for some hint of what he meant. But there was nothing but sincerity there, nothing but the quiet understanding that he had seen something in her that no one else had. She nodded slowly, unsure of how to navigate this new territory between them. But as she stood there, looking at Dominic, she realized something important. It wasn't just about the help he had given her. It was about the way he made her feel seen. For the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt like she mattered. And it was terrifying, yet comforting, all at once. Later that evening, as she lay in bed, her thoughts drifted back to Dominic's words. She couldn't deny that she was beginning to feel something for him, something more than just gratitude. But she didn't know what it meant. She didn't know if she was ready for whatever this was between them. All she knew was that, for the first time, she was no longer invisible. And that, in itself, was enough to keep her going. The weeks continued to pass in a blur of moments that left Jasmine feeling like she was both a part of something and yet still detached from it all. Living in the mansion was like being caught in a world that wasn't her own. She had her own room now, a space where she could be herself, away from the chaos of the daily routines that had once consumed her. But as comfortable as the mansion was, something inside her still longed for the life she had left behind. Her past felt so far away now, as if it belonged to someone else. Her thoughts often wandered back to the streets she had walked before, the small apartment she had shared with her mother, the feeling of being invisible to most of the world. But now, everything was different. There was Dominic. He had become a constant presence in her life. It wasn't just the way he had offered her protection or the quiet moments they shared in the evenings. It was more than that. Jasmine found herself thinking about him more often than she cared to admit. She had never been one to let her guard down, but Dominic made her feel as though she didn't have to protect herself anymore. He saw her for who she was, not just the maid or the woman who had come from a life of hardship. He saw her as someone worthy of something more. One evening, after dinner, they sat in the grand library of the mansion. The room was warm, the soft glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows across the room. Dominic was flipping through a book, but his attention was on Jasmine, as it often was these days. She was sitting across from him, absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her wine glass with her fingers, lost in thought. "You seem far away tonight," Dominic said, his voice low and gentle. Jasmine looked up at him, startled for a moment, as if she hadn't realized he had been watching her. "I'm just thinking," she said quietly, not sure how to explain the turmoil inside her. Dominic put the book down and leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. "About what?" he asked, his tone curious but caring. Jasmine hesitated. She had never been one to share her thoughts so openly. She had spent so much of her life guarding her feelings, keeping them locked away. But something about Dominic made her feel like she could be honest with him. "About everything," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "About how I ended up here and why I stayed." Dominic's expression softened, and he leaned back in his chair, giving her space to speak. "You don't have to explain yourself to me," he said quietly. "But if you want to, I'm listening." Jasmine's heart fluttered at his words. It wasn't often that someone offered her such understanding, such patience. She had grown so accustomed to being overlooked, to having her voice drowned out by the noise of the world. But with Dominic, she felt like her words mattered. She took a deep breath and began, her voice shaking slightly. "I came from nothing," she said, her eyes downcast. "My mother worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. I never had anything. And when she died, I was left with nothing but the weight of all the things I had to give up to survive." She paused, her emotions threatening to spill over, but she held herself together. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be here, living in this mansion with you. But when you offered me a place, a way out, I didn't know how to say no." She looked up at him then, her eyes meeting his with a raw honesty that surprised even her. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel about it all. I don't know if I'm supposed to be grateful, or if I'm just trying to survive like I always have." There was a long silence between them, one that felt heavier than anything she had ever experienced. Dominic didn't say anything at first, his gaze intense as he studied her. Finally, he stood up and walked over to her, his presence filling the space in a way that made her heart race. He gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "Jasmine," he said softly, his voice filled with a tenderness she hadn't expected. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. Life doesn't always come with easy answers, and sometimes, you just have to take it one step at a time." Jasmine blinked, the weight of his words settling over her. She had spent so much time trying to understand everything, trying to make sense of a life that had never made sense. But maybe, just maybe, Dominic was right. Maybe she didn't have to have all the answers. Maybe it was okay to just be. "You've already done more than enough," Dominic continued, his voice steady. "You don't owe anyone an explanation. You're here because you belong here. And that's enough." His words wrapped around her like a blanket, comforting and warm. For the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt like she could let go of the fears and doubts that had held her captive for so long. She squeezed his hand, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. Dominic nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of his own lips. "You're welcome," he said softly. And in that moment, Jasmine realized that maybe she had found something she hadn't even known she was looking for, a place where she truly belonged, with someone who saw her for who she was, and not for what she had been. The days grew warmer as spring began to take hold, and with the changing seasons, something else in Jasmine's life was shifting. The mansion, which once felt like an unfamiliar place where she was just another face among many, now felt like a home she had learned to embrace. It was subtle at first, Small things like Dominic's occasional smile, or the way he would take the time to ask about her day, as if he genuinely cared about her well-being. These gestures, though simple, had begun to mean more to her than she was willing to admit. As they spent more time together, Jasmine began to realize that the connection between them was more than just a fleeting moment or a temporary arrangement. There was something deeper, something that had begun to quietly build between them, even when they didn't speak. It wasn't the lavish surroundings, the fine dinners, or the grand events that made her feel at home. It was the quiet, unspoken moments shared with Dominic. One afternoon, as they sat together on the terrace overlooking the gardens, Dominic turned to her, his expression thoughtful. Jasmine had become accustomed to these peaceful moments, where time seemed to slow down just enough for them to be together without the world intruding. "You've been here for a while now," Dominic said, his voice soft but laced with an undertone of something she couldn't quite place. Jasmine nodded, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "And I've noticed something," he continued, his gaze not leaving hers. "You've changed." His words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. "How?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "You're not the same woman who walked through that door all those weeks ago. You found a strength in yourself that you didn't even know was there." Jasmine felt a warmth spread through her at his words, but there was also a pang of uncertainty. Was he right? Had she changed? She had never thought of herself as particularly strong. She had always been the one who stayed in the background, the one who didn't draw attention to herself. But with Dominic, something had shifted. She had begun to see herself differently, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. "I'm just trying to make sense of it all," Jasmine said, her voice soft. "Everything is so different now." Dominic's gaze softened, and for a moment, his usual stoic demeanor slipped, revealing something more vulnerable beneath the surface. "I know it's a lot to take in," he said, "but you don't have to do it alone." His words lingered in the air, and Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. She had never had anyone say that to her before. In her old life, she had always been the one to shoulder everything, to handle things on her own. But with Dominic, there was a different kind of promise, one where she didn't have to carry the weight alone. She looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment, something clicked. She wasn't just here because she needed help. She was here because, somehow, she mattered. And that realization was more overwhelming than anything she had ever experienced. For a long time, Jasmine had believed that she was unworthy of anything more than the life she had known. But now, sitting beside Dominic, she realized that she had the chance to change everything. She didn't know what the future held or what her role in Dominic's world truly was. But for the first time, she felt like she had a place. It wasn't just about the mansion or the luxury or even the protection that Dominic offered. It was about the quiet moments, the shared understanding between them that didn't need words to make sense. Dominic was right about one thing. She had changed. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something she had never allowed herself to dream of. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the mansion, Dominic and Jasmine shared another quiet moment, this time without the weight of the world pressing down on them. The sounds of the night began to fill the air, and Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment, taking it all in. There was a peace here, a peace that had once seemed so far out of reach. And as she opened her eyes to look at Dominic, she realized that, for the first time, she felt like she belonged. She wasn't just the maid, the outsider. She was part of something that made her feel whole. And that feeling, that simple understanding, was enough to carry her through whatever came next. It had been a few weeks since Jasmine had made the decision to stay, and the reality of her new life was starting to settle in. The mansion had become her world, but it wasn't the walls or the luxurious surroundings that made her feel at home. It was the quiet moments with Dominic, the small gestures that spoke volumes more than words ever could. As they spent more time together, Jasmine began to realize just how much she had changed. The woman who had walked into this mansion was different from the one who sat beside Dominic now. She wasn't the same timid, uncertain person she had been when she first arrived. Her confidence was growing, her voice a little stronger each day, and the weight she had carried for so long seemed to be lifting, piece by piece. It wasn't just about the lifestyle she now had. but about the way she had learned to see herself through Dominic's eyes. He had given her something she hadn't even known she needed. He had made her believe in her own worth. Dominic was still a mystery to her in many ways, but she was starting to understand him better. There were moments when his usual cold, calculating demeanor would slip, and she would see the man beneath the facade, the man who had his own burdens, his own fears. The more she saw, the more she realized how much they had in common, how both of them had been shaped by their pasts. But as their connection deepened, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. There was still a distance between them, a space that felt impossible to close. She wasn't sure what it was, but the feeling lingered in the back of her mind. One evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the gardens, Dominic turned to her with a thoughtful expression on his face. "You've been quiet tonight," he said, his voice gentle, but his eyes searching hers. Jasmine glanced at him, surprised. She hadn't realized how much her thoughts had been consuming her until he pointed it out. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile. But Dominic wasn't convinced. He had always been observant, noticing the smallest details that most people would overlook. "No, you're not," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You've been carrying something. You can talk to me, Jasmine. You know that." Jasmine hesitated, unsure of how to put her feelings into words. She had always been good at keeping things bottled up, hiding behind a wall of silence. But with Dominic, something inside her wanted to break free. "I don't know how to explain it," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel, I don't know, like something is missing. Like there's a part of me that still doesn't belong here, even though I've made my peace with staying." Dominic listened intently, his gaze never leaving her face. He seemed to be weighing her words carefully, his usual composure never wavering. After a moment, he spoke, his voice low and reassuring. "You belong here, Jasmine. More than you realize." The words were simple, but they hit her like a wave. She had always doubted herself, never feeling truly worthy of the life she now had. But hearing him say that, hearing him believe it, made something inside her stir. She looked at him, searching his eyes for any sign of insincerity, but all she saw was warmth and truth. For the first time in a long while, Jasmine felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of something that she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just about the mansion or the protection or the lavish lifestyle. It was about the way Dominic saw her, the way he made her feel like she was more than just the sum of her past mistakes. He had given her a sense of belonging, a sense of worth that she had never known before. But even as the weight of his words sank in, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. She had come to realize that no matter how much she had changed, she was still a prisoner of her own doubts. She didn't know if it was the fear of being vulnerable, the fear of losing herself in the process, but something held her back from fully embracing the life she had been given. It was a thought she couldn't shake, and it gnawed at her as she lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, lost in thought. The next day, Dominic surprised her with an invitation to a private dinner. It wasn't unusual for him to host meetings or events, but this felt different, more personal. She had become accustomed to the way Dominic did things, calm, composed, always in control. But tonight, he had asked her to join him for dinner as a way to talk, to discuss things without any distractions. The evening unfolded in a way that was unexpected. The table was set for two, with a view of the city in the distance, and the ambience was unlike anything Jasmine had experienced before. Dominic was relaxed, his usual sternness replaced with a more laid-back demeanor, and as they spoke, she found herself opening up to him in a way she hadn't done before. She talked about her past, her fears, the things that had shaped her, and for the first time, she didn't feel judged. Dominic listened, truly listened, and when she was done, he said the one thing that she had needed to hear all along. "You're not broken, Jasmine. You're just getting started." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that resonated deep within her. She wasn't sure where this journey was leading, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone. Dominic had become her anchor, the one person who saw her for who she was, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to let herself be seen. The days seemed to stretch on in a comforting rhythm as Jasmine settled further into her life within the mansion. She had come to appreciate the quiet moments with Dominic, the ones that didn't require words but carried weight in the silence between them. They had shared so many quiet dinners, walks in the gardens, and even moments when neither spoke at all, but simply existed in the same space. Jasmine found peace in these moments, something she had never thought possible. The tension that had once been a constant in her life, wondering if she was good enough, if she belonged, had slowly started to fade, replaced with a quiet sense of certainty. The mansion had become more than just a place to stay. It had become a place where she could breathe, a place where she felt safe. But as much as things had settled, Jasmine knew that something was changing. There was still an unspoken distance between her and Dominic, something that she hadn't quite been able to place. They were no longer just two people in the same space. There was an undeniable bond between them, but it was one that neither of them had fully acknowledged. Jasmine had spent so long building walls around herself, guarding her emotions and fears, that the idea of truly opening up to Dominic seemed impossible. She had never allowed herself to trust anyone that deeply before. But there was something in the way Dominic treated her, something that made her feel like she could be herself, without judgment. It was one evening, as they sat together in the study, when Dominic finally broke the silence. The fire crackled softly in the background, casting flickering shadows on the walls as he turned to face her. "Jasmine," he began, his voice calm but laced with something else, something that made her heart race. "You've been here for a while now. I've been meaning to talk to you about something." Jasmine glanced at him, her breath catching in her throat. She had sensed that this moment was coming, but she hadn't expected it to feel so heavy. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic leaned forward slightly, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I think it's time we talk about what this is between us," he said slowly, carefully. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Jasmine didn't know how to respond. What was this between them? Was it just gratitude on her part? Was it something more? She had always been afraid of the unknown, of things that didn't have clear definitions, but Dominic had a way of making the ambiguity feel safe, even comforting. "What do you mean?" Jasmine asked, her voice shaky but steady. Dominic's gaze softened, and he leaned back in his chair, his hands folding in front of him. "I mean, I don't want this to be just an arrangement anymore," he said, his voice lower now, more serious. "I don't want you to feel like you're here just because you have no other choice. I want you to be here because you want to be." Jasmine's heart fluttered at his words. She wasn't sure what she had expected him to say, but this wasn't it. "I want you to feel like you're a part of this," he continued, his tone gentle. "Not just in this house, but in my life. I want you to know that you matter to me, more than you know." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat as his words sank in. She hadn't expected him to say that. No one had ever made her feel like she mattered in this way. She had spent so long feeling like she didn't belong, like she was just passing through life without leaving a mark. But here, with Dominic, she was beginning to feel like she mattered, like her presence was important. She opened her mouth to speak, but found herself at a loss for words. She didn't know how to express the way his words made her feel, how much they meant to her. She had never known what it was like to be truly seen, to be valued for who she was and not what she could do. But with Dominic, it was different. He wasn't just offering her a place in his world. He was offering her something far more significant. He was offering her acceptance. Finally, she found her voice. I never thought I would be here, Dominic," she said quietly, her hands trembling slightly. "I never thought I would find a place where I felt like I belonged. I've always been trying to survive, trying to make it through each day. But now, with you, I feel like I've finally found a place where I can just be." Dominic's eyes softened, and he reached out, taking her hand in his. The simple gesture, so genuine and kind, made her heart swell. "You're not just surviving anymore, Jasmine. You're living," he said softly. "And you deserve to live, to have everything you've ever wanted." His words settled over her like a comforting embrace, and for the first time in a long time, Jasmine allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have everything she had ever dreamed of. The quiet, unspoken connection between them had grown into something more, something that neither of them had expected but both had silently acknowledged. Jasmine squeezed his hand, her heart full of emotions she didn't quite know how to express. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to hide her feelings, to lock them away. She could be herself with Dominic, and that was something she had never experienced before. As the night stretched on, Jasmine realized that she had found more than just a place to stay. She had found a place where she could truly live. And in that moment, She knew that whatever came next, she was ready. The days passed by quietly, but the silence between Jasmine and Dominic felt different now. There was a calmness that had settled between them, an understanding that didn't need words. Jasmine spent her days in the mansion, moving through the halls with a newfound ease. The weight of her past still lingered, but it no longer controlled her. She had found a place here, not just as a maid, but as someone who belonged. It wasn't just Dominic's kindness that had changed her. It was the space he had given her to grow. The trust he had shown her allowed her to finally stop hiding from herself, to embrace the woman she was becoming. Yet, despite the quiet peace, something was shifting within her. She had always believed that security was the ultimate goal, that surviving each day was enough. But now, she found herself wondering if there was more to life than simply existing. What did she truly want? What was she truly capable of? Dominic had given her the freedom to explore these questions, but there were moments when doubt crept in. What if she wasn't ready to fully embrace this new life? What if she wasn't worthy of everything that was being offered to her? Those thoughts swirled in her mind, but she refused to let them take root. Instead, she focused on the here and now. One afternoon, as Jasmine was walking through the gardens, she heard Dominic's voice calling her from the mansion's terrace. She turned, her heart quickening slightly as she saw him standing there, watching her with a faint smile on his lips. "Jasmine," he called again, his voice warm and inviting. She walked towards him, feeling a strange sense of anticipation building in her chest. As she approached, Dominic stepped forward, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Come with me," he said, his voice low but filled with purpose. Without a word, Jasmine followed him inside, her heart racing as she wondered what he had in mind. They walked through the mansion's grand hallway, and as they reached the study, Dominic opened the door and gestured for her to enter. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of the fireplace casting long shadows across the walls. Dominic turned to her, his expression serious but not unkind. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady, "about the future, about what we both want." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I don't want to keep you in this world as if you're just another part of the mansion," he said, his voice quieter now. "I want you to have more than this, more than what I can offer you here." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this conversation, but it felt important, like a moment she couldn't ignore. "More than this," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic nodded slowly. "I'm offering you the chance to make your own decisions, to choose your own path," he said. "I want you to be free to explore your life outside of this world. You don't have to stay here if you don't want to." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Jasmine was speechless. She had never considered that kind of freedom, that kind of choice. She had spent so long surviving, so long trapped by the circumstances of her past, that the idea of truly living, of choosing her own future, seemed like something from a dream. Dominic continued, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "I'm not saying you should leave," he said, "but I want you to know that the choice is yours. You don't have to stay here just because you feel like you don't have anywhere else to go." Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest as the weight of his words sank in. She had never had this kind of choice before. No one had ever given her the freedom to decide what her life would look like. It had always been about survival, about getting through each day. But now, with Dominic's offer, she realized she had the opportunity to shape her own future. For the first time, she felt the weight of possibility. "I don't know what to say," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic smiled gently. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said. "Take your time, but know that I will support whatever you decide." His words were both comforting and overwhelming. Jasmine had never been in control of her own life, and now, with one simple offer, everything had changed. She wasn't sure if she was ready to leave this life behind, but the idea of having the freedom to choose her own path was both exhilarating and terrifying. As the night wore on, Jasmine found herself lost in thought, her mind spinning with possibilities. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she realized she had the power to shape it. And with Dominic's support, she could finally make her own choices, free from the chains of her past. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. and that thought made her heart swell with hope. The following days were filled with contemplation for Jasmine. Her mind was constantly turning over Dominic's offer, each thought adding to the weight of the decision she had to make. The freedom he had offered her was both a gift and a challenge, something she had never anticipated, let alone thought she deserved. In the quiet moments, she would sit in her room, staring out the window at the sprawling grounds below, wondering if she could truly leave behind the life she had come to know, even though it had been full of uncertainty and hardship. Every part of her, every fiber of her being, was pulled in two directions. The mansion had become more than just a place to stay. It had become a home where she felt seen, where her presence mattered. Dominic had shown her kindness and understanding, and she had begun to trust him in ways she had never trusted anyone before. But with that trust came the fear of losing herself, the fear of becoming too comfortable, too dependent. Jasmine had always been independent, always relied on herself to get by. To accept this new life, to allow herself to be a part of something bigger, was terrifying. And yet, the idea of stepping outside the mansion, of reclaiming her own life, seemed equally daunting. She had never allowed herself to dream of freedom, to dream of a life that wasn't defined by struggle. The weight of this decision hung over her like a cloud, casting a shadow on the otherwise peaceful moments she shared with Dominic. She had tried to ignore the growing sense of unease, the feeling that something was missing, but it lingered. Every time she looked at Dominic, every time they shared one of those silent moments, a small voice in the back of her mind asked, "What happens next?" That evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a deep orange, Dominic invited her to the terrace again. The soft glow of the setting sun cast long shadows over the mansion, and for a moment, Jasmine felt like the world was holding its breath. She stepped outside to find him already there, standing at the edge of the balcony, his eyes focused on the horizon. The cool evening air ruffled his hair, but he didn't seem to notice. Jasmine approached him quietly, unsure of what to say. She wasn't ready to voice her thoughts yet, but something in her knew that this moment was inevitable. Dominic turned to face her as she arrived beside him, his gaze softening when he saw the uncertainty in her eyes. "You've been distant," he said, his voice calm but carrying an underlying tension. Jasmine looked up at him, trying to find the right words. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice quiet. "About everything. About what you said." Dominic waited, his expression patient. "And?" he asked, his eyes searching hers, as if waiting for her to make the next step. Jasmine hesitated, then spoke, her voice stronger now. "I don't know if I can leave this place," she admitted. "I don't know if I'm ready for that. But I also don't know if I can stay here, living like this, pretending that it's enough." The words were out before she could stop them, and as they hung in the air between them, she felt a weight lift from her chest. She had said what she had been too afraid to voice for so long. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his eyes intense, but not unkind. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said softly. "You don't have to make a decision tonight, or tomorrow. You have time. I won't rush you." Jasmine blinked, surprised by his words. He wasn't pushing her to decide, wasn't making her feel like she had to choose right away. He was giving her space to think, to breathe. And for the first time, she realized that it wasn't just about the mansion or about staying with him. It was about her. It was about what she wanted, what she needed to do for herself. "I don't want to feel stuck anymore," Jasmine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to make my own choices. I want to know that I'm choosing for me, not because I have no other option." Dominic nodded slowly, his eyes understanding. "You deserve that," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You deserve to choose your own path, to have control over your life." Jasmine felt a rush of emotion at his words, a mix of relief and something else, something deeper. For the first time, she felt like she could truly take control of her own future, that she had the power to shape it in a way that felt right for her. She didn't have to be stuck in the past. She didn't have to hold on to a life that no longer served her. She could move forward. "I don't know what's next," she said softly, "but I know I need to take that first step." Dominic smiled, the warmth of his expression making her heart flutter. "You're stronger than you know," he said, "and you're not alone in this." For the first time, Jasmine felt the weight of uncertainty lift, replaced with something lighter. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, she would face it with the strength and courage she had found within herself. And that was enough. Jasmine woke up to the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains. The mansion, still quiet at this early hour, seemed peaceful in a way that felt like a promise. She lay in bed for a moment, staring up at the ceiling, the weight of the past few days settling into her mind. The decisions she had been avoiding for so long were no longer something she could ignore. She had found a sense of peace in her life here, a stability that she had never known before. But now, as the sun rose higher in the sky, she knew that it was time to confront the uncertainty that still lingered inside her. She had spent so much of her life fighting to survive, to make it through the day, that the idea of truly living had always felt out of reach. But now, with Dominic's words echoing in her mind, Jasmine realized that she had been given the opportunity to change the course of her life. She didn't have to hold on to her old fears. She didn't have to remain trapped in a life that wasn't hers. She had a choice. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. Jasmine stood from her bed and moved toward the window, looking out over the lush gardens below. The world outside felt so vast, so full of possibilities. It was easy to see why Dominic had offered her this chance, to step into a future that was hers to shape. But what did that future look like? What would it mean for her to leave behind the safety of the mansion, the security of the life she had started to build here? Her heart raced at the thought. Dominic had given her the freedom to choose, but what if she made the wrong choice? What if she wasn't strong enough to handle the life outside these walls? Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising storm inside her. She had always been strong, always pushed forward, even when the odds were against her. She had survived everything that life had thrown at her, and now, for the first time, she had the chance to thrive. She wasn't alone. Dominic had made sure of that. He had been there for her in ways that no one else had ever been. His support, his belief in her, had given her the strength to see her own worth. She had come a long way from the woman who had walked through the doors of the mansion, unsure of her place in the world. Now, she knew that she had a place, not just in the mansion, but in the world. She wasn't just someone who had to survive anymore. She could live, truly live, and the future could be hers to create. As she stood there, watching the morning unfold, Jasmine made her decision. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her life anymore. She wasn't going to let uncertainty hold her back. She had a chance to shape her own future, and she was going to take it. Later that day, when Dominic returned to the mansion, Jasmine was waiting for him in the study. She had made up her mind. She was ready to move forward, to embrace the life she had been given the chance to build. When Dominic entered the room, he looked at her with curiosity, sensing the shift in her energy. "Jasmine," he asked softly, his voice gentle. She smiled, standing up to face him. "I've made my decision," she said, her voice steady. "I'm ready to take the next step. I'm ready to live." Dominic's expression softened, and for the first time, Jasmine saw a look of pride in his eyes. It wasn't just about what he had given her. It was about what she had discovered in herself. He stepped toward her, his presence comforting and strong. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. "You've come so far, and you're not alone in this." Jasmine nodded, feeling the weight of his words sink in. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Dominic by her side, and for the first time, she truly believed that everything she had dreamed of was within her reach. As they stood there, the soft light of the setting sun casting long shadows across the room, Jasmine realized that the future wasn't something to be afraid of. It was something to be embraced. She was no longer just surviving. She was living, and that was enough to carry her forward, no matter what came next.